What advice would you give both, young people in college or young professionals that are just starting their career?
The real estate business is very different than when I joined it. The major food groups like multifamily, like industrial, like office, retail, have all been institutionalized. So all of the opportunity is in alternatives. The good news is in these new businesses, nobody's an expert. So a young person can be an expert very, very quickly. There's great opportunities in new sectors. And what I would encourage, everybody to do is not only be a lifelong learner, but to think about what's next instead of what's historical. And developing mentoring relationships, incredibly important. You can't do it alone.
Yeah.
But having mentors and friends and industry experts who want to help you bring you up and you bring them up too, and this sort of reciprocal relationship is completely vital.
The Inside Deal is proudly sponsored by the Weiser Center for Real Estate at the University of Michigan, a program focused on developing the next generation of leaders in real estate, infrastructure, and entrepreneurship. Through education, mentorship, and industry engagement, the Weiser Center is helping bridge the gap between the classroom and the real world of deals, investing, and innovation. We're grateful for their partnership and support in bringing these conversations to life. Adam Gordon, welcome to the Inside Deal podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's so I don't think you remember this, but I certainly do, how we actually met. I was a broker at Eastern Consolidated. I was cold calling, and you had a property on Bowery, and I cold called you, seeing if you wanted to sell. And you obviously got 100 calls a day from these kind of brokers, and we're short. And like, all right, they got time. I was like, wait. We started actually getting into a conversation. You saw that I actually knew what was going on and was sharp and could talk the talk with you. And we started going back and forth, and you quickly stopped and said, "What are you doing right now? Why don't you come down and meet me for a coffee?" And that's actually how we met. I thought that was a really interesting way to actually meet, because it shows when you're sourcing, when you're doing something, if there's actually substance behind what you're doing, even though you were about to try to get me off the phone, that can be an opening. So don't know if you remember that, but that's actually how we met.
I think I curate talent and I try to recognize talent quickly, and there has to be reciprocity in relationships.
Yep.
I have to add value to you, and I feel that way, and you have to add value to me. And if you're making the outreach, the phone call, you've got to prove that pretty quickly. And it's easy to do with a small amount of research, but surprisingly few people do it.
Absolutely. So let's go all the way back. So you were born in New York.
Yes.
But grew up in Ohio, just like myself. So what were you like as a kid? Like, walk me through your upbringing and kind of from ages, 2 or 3 to by the time you went to college.
Well, the first thing I'd say is my interests haven't really changed since I was a kid. I was always interested in nature, in business, originally small business and entrepreneurship, design. I had not only National Geographic subscription, but one to Architectural Digest and one to World of Interiors. And building things, seeing things happen in real life. So I as a kid, was watching tons of TV, Jacques Cousteau, the Nature Channel, doing that. I was also playing around with cars from the time I was 16, because in Ohio, you can't get around without a car. And the design of cars was always really interesting to me. And then I had small businesses. So Gourmet, my last name's Gordon. Gourmet, my friend was Mayerson. Enterprises, your complete party helpers. So we were doing bartending and catering. I had a salad and herbal iced tea mobile vending cart in Courthouse Square in Dayton. So I was just putting my hands in all kinds of little businesses and enterprises from the time I was, 14, 15 years old.
Entrepreneur from an early age.
Yes. Yeah. And part of that was I really didn't take direction very well. I was not a corporate man. So I needed to be my own boss. And I realized that. but I also kind of wanted to shape my own destiny.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't want to end up in Ohio. Given that I was born in New York, I always saw the difference. And I knew that if I didn't take control, that I would end up, in Dayton, moving furniture in some administrative role.
Yep. So your dad was the first one in your family to go to college, but he was not entrepreneurial. You want to kind of tell me about that dynamic?
Yeah. So, my dad, third generation New Yorker, grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, put himself through City College and Columbia Law School on the GI Bill. And his goal was financial security for his family. I don't know that he particularly enjoyed his job, but he wanted something which, optimized for lifestyle and a risk-free career. And so he did not understand or appreciate or value entrepreneurship or really career enjoyment at all. And that was all the way through, my childhood. So he wasn't in the least bit supportive of, my career path of being an entrepreneur and wanting to be an entrepreneur. He just didn't relate to it. So it's not involved in real estate either. And then on my, dad and with my mother, they didn't care about design. So I don't know where all this came from. They weren't into cars. So I was not the family where I took after my dad, where, I grew up either playing with cars or, my parents were in antique stores on the weekend. That was not my childhood.
Right. It's funny. I think that's very common for that generation of us who went through the Great Depression and wanted security and wanted just a steady, not risky life for the family. But you came out the other side of that and turned it upside down. So you ended up at the University of Michigan.
Right.
Driving a Porsche.
Right. So I remember very vividly my first car, Pontiac Le Mans Sport, jacked up in the rear end, drove it. I was very proud of it. It was in the parking lot at school. Must have been a junior in high school. I was able to get this woman, Stephanie Weber, to accept a ride home from me in the car. We walked out to the parking lot. She saw my car in there. It was kind of clapped out, and she just turned around. This is not like Amazon rom-com where, she actually fell in love with me and came back. Like, she just turned around and left. And I knew I needed a little more game and a lot more car. And so I sold that one after fixing it up, bought another one, sold that. And 12 cars in, I had a Porsche 911, which I drove through my time at Michigan.
Not too dissimilar from your eventual career as a developer. So
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I recognized I could create value through an active process, which for me was flipping cars. I started with where I was and I had a vision for where I wanted to go. And I, understood I could figure it out in between. And then I also understood that there were people that knew a lot more about these things than I did. And, a big part of success as an entrepreneur is partnership, right? Of, cultivating people and making it worth their while to get involved with you. And so, a lot of my success I attribute to the partners that I've had.
That's awesome. So you were a poli-sci major, just like myself in Michigan. That probably made your dad happy.
It did. My dad wanted me to go to law school. And so he thought I'd go be a poli-sci major, learn to read and write, communicate well. But were I, had I, known more than I knew then, I would have been a business undergrad because, later when I got into business, I realized I knew absolutely nothing. And so I went back to Wharton Business School for an MBA. So if I was doing it today, I would be a business undergrad and save the 2 years.
Yeah, totally. So your first experience with business was in internships during college, right?
So I did 2 summers on Wall Street, working at a firm called Beige Halsey Stewart Shields. And then when I got out, my dad had a buddy who was a syndicator, meaning he was raising money for other people's deals. And the guy that he was raising capital for was in trouble. and my dad's pal wanted somebody to kind of watch from the inside. So he sort of installed me as assistant to the head of the firm. Turns out the guy committed tax fraud. And I ended up working from the time there were 660 people at this guy's firm to one of 6, homesteading under bankruptcy laws. And because I was a kid and I had nothing to lose, I got all this great experience because all the rats immediately started jumping ship when I got there. So I was involved with turnarounds, workouts, bankruptcies, sales of businesses, really learned a lot. And I went to Wharton assuming that I was going to continue that career because in the bankruptcy world, it's like triage. Like you've got a patient that is on the operating table and it's going to live or die very, very quickly. And I found that exciting.
That's getting a lot of experience from day one. And I think that's a theme that's super important is whatever you're doing, you want to see a lot, experience a lot and get that experience.
Yeah.
So you were at Wharton, they had companies coming in, free beer, free food, presenting to you guys. That's how you got into real estate.
So one night I was at the place we used to go to because they had the best food and cocktails, and companies would come in and talk about what they did. And there was a company that came in to present with a funny sounding name called Trammell Crow. And they said, don't join unless you want to be a millionaire, make partner in 3 years. And I'm kind of, raising my hand from the back. All that sounded great. But Trammell Crow didn't typically hire guys like me from Wharton. They would hire much more kind of like corporate, Wonder Bread looking guys from Harvard Business School. And so I really wanted to work there. So I took the train from Philadelphia, from 30th Street Station into New York, and they had just opened an office in New York City. And I went to see them. I'd done a lot of reading about Trammell Crow. And I said, look, let me become your summer intern and I'll work for free because I really want the experience and I think I can add value. And if at the end of the summer you think I'm worth something, pay me whatever I'm worth. And they were, for whatever reason, they were impressed by that. And so they hired me and they paid me. And so I worked at Trammell that summer, and then I got a full-time offer to return to headquarters, and at that time it was Dallas. And in the meantime, I took some real estate classes, and I found I really enjoyed it and had a bit of a knack for it.
That's an amazing story. I mean, I think it's something that's, you can really, in terms of advice, they didn't recruit you, you recruited them. So you came up to New York, you told them why they should hire you for the summer, even though they were recruiting probably, other kids, and said, I'll work for free and just give me the experience and just to get your foot in the door.
I still push. It hasn't changed. I'm still on LinkedIn. We can talk about it, but we sold a site to Tesla. I went on LinkedIn. I DM'd 5 different people at Tesla. One of the guys got back to me. He said, let me introduce you to this other guy. And I ended up doing a deal because I reached out to people. So I'm still doing it every day of the week, just like I did at the beginning of my career. So it doesn't end.
It is all about sourcing. If you want to be successful in business ever, or, especially today, you have to be evolving and be aggressive and aggressively reaching out and sourcing any kind of opportunity. I mean, so you're the epitome of that. So it's but let's go back to Trammell Crow. So that was your first job out of business school in real estate. What were the main things that you learned at Trammell Crow that helped you and you took with you throughout your career?
So it was a couple of things. The first is they hired really high quality people and they gave them a piece of the business. So you would go into an office, work in that office for 3 years. If you're good, then you would become a partner in deals you originated at that office. Trammell talked about the value of the lease and the tenant being everything. He said, otherwise you just have an empty box. And I've carried through that idea. I handle all the major leasing of Wildflower because I want to be near demand. I want to see where demand is today, where it's going. I want to be able to ask questions, and I want all that unfiltered through the brokerage community. And they were also very relationship driven because it was a local business to them. You develop local relationships and you become part of your community. So, I learned all those things from Trammell. And Trammell also understood scale, which took me a lot longer to learn. But I saw what they were doing. At the same time, I'm a New Yorker, and Dallas didn't suit me. It was, red Ferraris and blonde hair and barbecue and all that's okay. It wasn't the New York City lifestyle that I had grown to love. So I went back to New York. I ended up working in banking for 2 years.
So you were at Bear Stearns, right?
Yes.
So those 2 years in banking, what was your main what were your main responsibilities, and kind of what did you learn there that you kind of took with you to your first entrepreneurial real estate?
At Bear Stearns, I learned how to finance and sell properties. That was really it. So making books, understanding how a lender, how an investor looks at a deal, understanding how to run a sale process, understanding kind of at the macro level, how to, look at a deal in terms of, demographics, supply, demand, capital markets, sort of all those kind of important things. But what I saw was the principals who we were financing were having a lot more fun and making a lot more money than we were. And I wanted to be one of them and become an entrepreneur again. So I learned just enough to be dangerous in 2 years at Trammell. A year at Trammell and 2 years at Bear Stearns, and then left.
So your first opportunity on the principal side came in Chicago.
Yeah. So I met a couple guys who were doing rehabs in an area called Bucktown, sort of like Tribeca might have been 30 years ago, but they would just do a deal, have to flip it for more cash for the next deal. And they were kind of spinning. And so they gave me a third interest in 3 deals to create a more systematic financing approach for them to do all their rehab. So I started with them. I got an interest in a couple of deals. Chicago again wasn't for me, and I think it's a theme of not only looking at what you want to do, but looking at what you don't want to do. And then I came back to New York to kind of look for the first strategy, and I thought about it strategically. Look for a first strategy where I could have some impact and frankly develop some capital.
So the skills that you learned at Bear Stearns were the skills that you used to provide the value in this partnership in Chicago. Then it was time to look for the next opportunity. You wanted to go back to New York. What did you see?
I had my family by then. My dad had retired and moved to Vermont. Up in Vermont, I saw this burgeoning factory outlet store business. Originally it started. There would be a corner of a shoe factory with shoes where they had something where they had a stitch missing, or they had 10 or 20% of the shoes they couldn't sell, and you could buy shoes very inexpensively. And there are shoe factories in Freeport, Maine, North Conway, New Hampshire, and then Manchester, Vermont, which became kind of a dedicated factory outlet store area for the 10 or 20% of things that didn't sell. Ralph Lauren opened up a factory outlet store there, and it turned out to be the most profitable Ralph Lauren in the Northeast, because it was goods that otherwise would have had to have been wholesaled somewhere else where they could sell it at retail 10, 20, 30% off. And so Manchester was kind of booming in a little way. I saw that a couple developers there were building stores individually, and it was a pretty tedious process. So I had this idea of there were a couple little shopping centers there, taking an existing shopping center that had local tenants, buying out those local tenants, and then leasing to outlet stores at much higher rents. So that was my first deal of any scale up in Manchester.
Talk to me about, so you didn't really have much money, but
Zero.
Zero.
Be kind of round number.
Zero is a nice round number. So talk to me how you did that. How did you structure it? How did you finance it? You had this idea and you wanted to execute it. You found these shopping centers. Just walk me through step by step how you actually executed that.
Sure. So I took my second year bonus at Bear Stearns, which was $100,000, so roughly $50,000 after tax. I was kind of living off of that, and then I found my first deal, which was a shopping center. Remember, it was $1,235,000, a 40% empty vacant shopping center, the balance filled with local tenants. I got it under contract for a borrowed 50 grand from my old man. He wanted 500% interest, which was totally usurious and horrible, but I didn't have a choice. But I got it under contract. I found there was 40% empty. I found a tenant to take the vacant space at a much, much higher rent. So I think the tenant was paying $19.50, and the average rent in that shopping center was $6 a foot. And so I'd created over $1 million of value on a $1,235,000 purchase while I was under contract. I then put together financing books. At that time, it was before the internet, so you had to do it by hand. They had something called a velo binder, which was a binding machine where you would take copies of something you would do at a Kinko's.
I say lots of Kinko's strips right there.
Right. You go to Kinko's Copy Center, then you take your velo binder and make 40 books. I went out to 42 different institutions where I literally dropped things off, tried to get meetings. I got turned down by 41. And the 42nd was actually a local bank that had a branch in the shopping center I was buying. The guy there took an interest in me, and he gave me basically 100% financing. So I needed closing costs, which was the 50 grand from my old man. And I got the deal closed. At the time that I closed it, there was something like $150,000 in positive cash flow over the mortgage, which at that time, that was the 80s. So that maybe that was equivalent of $500,000 or more. So I was kind of in business, and I'd created over $1 million in value. So I was at 29, at least on paper, a millionaire.
That's great. So how did you expand that business? What were the next deals?
So the next deal was the largest shopping center in that tiny town. It was called Manchester Shopping Center. It was, I think, 65,000 feet. Average rent in there was like $3 a foot. So I bought that. I got a bank loan from the same bank, and then went and raised money from it was a friends and family round, as some of my dad's buddies put money in. So I did that deal. Again, I was taking out really low rent paying tenants, replacing with higher rent paying tenants. So made a couple $1,000,000 more in that deal. But I saw, you can't fight demographics. There just wasn't a lot of population in Vermont. It was very anti-development. And I had bigger aspirations. So a guy sat down with me to try to buy that shopping center. And it turned out he was representing what was at that time the biggest shopping center REIT in the country, called Federal Realty Trust. And I sat down with him in New York. We were talking, and he started showing me photographs of his wife in a bikini. And it was very weird, So I was 32. He felt like a really old man. He was probably in his late 40s. She looked like she was in her late 40s, and I was very uncomfortable. So and I said to him, what else is interesting out there, as a way of not looking at his wife in a bikini. And he said, my brother just started this company called Storage Deluxe, building, it was urban infill self-storage. I didn't know what that was, but I said, can I go take a look? And so he took me to the first site, which is up in the Bronx. And it was the idea of a business inside a building. So at that time, a warehouse might have rented for $6 a foot, but by chopping it up into little units, all of a sudden your rent was $15 to $25 a square foot.
Right.
Because you're creating these little mini storage units. And the institutions didn't really understand it in New York City, because they said, look, it's lower income, it's non-white. And, my idea is like, we're all Americans. We all have stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And our apartments are small in New York City. They're rent regulated. And so you need a place to put things, or you need a place to start a small business. So I knew that I needed a partner. And so I went around to the most active developers in the metro area. And there was a company called Storage USA. And there was a guy there who was One of the guys running development in New York City, a fellow named Steve McKnight. Maybe Steve was 5 or 10 years older than me. And Steve was making a salary there. And I said, Steve, there's this big opportunity to develop urban infill self-storage in New York. I need a partner. I said, why don't you take 25% of the business and join me? And I said, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to work and you're going to make millions, or it's not going to work. You can go back to doing what you did before, but at least you know you tried. And Steve came and joined me. And that was the beginning of a run we had building hundreds of millions of dollars of urban infill self-storage in New York.
Did Steve have the construction expertise, the know-how to actually build? Because that's a very different business than leasing, than buying and leasing retail and replacing the tenants.
So Steve understood the players. Steve was credible in a meeting. He understood the numbers. He understood the rents. And he worked with a guy named Doug Chamberlain, who was the head of construction for Storage USA nationwide, and had built over 200 storage units, 200 storage buildings. We brought Doug in as our third partner / contract developer for the first number of deals so that we could learn construction with Doug. So, my view was always, you don't have to know everything, but you have to know who the people are who are credible.
Yeah.
Also with that team, I could go in front of any lender and we had instant credibility.
So he came and joined your development firm.
So Steve and I were the development firm, and then we brought Doug in on a deal by deal basis for the first couple of deals. And then every new business has an industry association, and they also tend to have gatherings, right? In this case, there were storage conventions in Las Vegas. So we joined the industry association. We went to Vegas and we met a company called Talinvest, who raised capital in the industry, and they raised our capital for us over 11 or 12 deals.
How many self-storage deals and developments did you guys end up building in New York?
I don't know, hundreds of millions. Yeah, hundreds of millions. So we had some real scale in the business.
So now you had the skill set of being a builder and being able to build in New York City, and you pay attention to what's going on in the world. You see things are changing, and you're reading about Amazon. Talk to me about how you then transformed your knowledge and your skill set from a self-storage developer to getting into the logistics world.
So I've always spent probably 20% of my time every day reading, learning. Most of my friends are not in the real estate business. You're one of the exceptions, but I'm always trying to figure out what's going on. And so in the morning, I'm reading the New York Times, I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, I'm reading Monocle magazine, I'm listening to podcasts. I'm just a curious guy. And I saw the rise of the modern e-commerce warehouse in other parts of the country. And I understood from the storage world that purpose-built buildings are much more efficient for business. And so there began to be a lot of concerns about the rise of too many storage facilities in New York City. Ultimately, storage became a prohibited use class in New York, but I was already thinking about Amazon. And so I found an architect that had built for Amazon nationally, and I brought them to New York. And I built the first modern e-commerce warehouse on spec in East New York and Brooklyn. Amazon came and they said, how did you figure this out? And I said, I didn't. Your architect figured it out.
Yeah.
And so I ended up leasing the first warehouse to Amazon. We've gone on to do, I think, 13 deals with them in New York City. We're by far their most active developer. So I pivoted from storage to e-commerce, but it's the same thing.
Yep.
It's building to spec. It's intercepting demand. It's seeing what the tenant wants, and then, building these relationships over time.
Walk me through, because you were starting a new business line. You were building something on spec before Amazon had leased it. Walk me through your process and the challenges and just the structure you did from both a capitalization standpoint and just convincing partners, convincing lenders that this was going to work.
So there's good news and bad news of a new business. The good news is, before everybody jumps in, there's great margins, right? Because the margins haven't been squeezed out by the lowest cost of capital provider.
Yeah.
It's also good news is that nobody's an expert because it's brand new to everybody. So you can come in and you can become an expert very, very quickly. The bad news is that capital tends to look in the rearview mirror. So they're looking at things that have already happened and they're very risk adverse. So it's much, much more difficult to raise capital for new businesses. So I got this first property under contract and we were unable to raise capital for it and had to let it go. 4 months later, my partner at the time was surfing in Montauk and heard that the next buyer had dropped the deal. In the meantime, we'd gone out and we'd found a partner. We'd found an equity partner to do the deal. We got it back under contract because we developed a relationship with the seller. So I'll kind of digress. So when you get a property under contract in New York, you get under, typically you have 45 days of due diligence and then you close 45 days later. In those 45 days, you do title, survey, environmental. We go and do geotechnical, subsurface investigation, develop plans. You could spend $150,000. When I couldn't come up with a partner the first time, I went to the seller and I said, listen, I can't perform, which was rare for us. And I said, I feel terribly. You guys have been great guys. I said, I'm going to give you everything that we have in due diligence and hopefully you can use it. So I gave him title, survey, environmental, geotech, plans. It was really valuable. And so 4 months later, not knowing the deal would come back to us, he knew who we were and knew that we were good guys. And so because of the relationship that I had developed with him earlier, he let us get back under contract. And so because we developed that relationship, we got it back under contract, we had capital, and then we were able to close.
Amazing. I mean, there's so many lessons there, both persistence, following up, and also always just doing the right thing, handling yourself the right way. And, that will eventually come back and help you. So that's an incredible story. So who was your partner on that deal?
So it was a high net worth individual. Yeah.
Okay. And how long into the development process did you lease it to Amazon?
So we leased it to Amazon probably 6 or 8 months in. They looked at it originally. Amazon was a very, very active. They were the biggest space occupier, I think, in history in the United States. So they had a big line of deals. So it took them some time. And we also had to figure things out because we understood what the building looked like. We didn't understand what their parking demands were. And so Amazon asked us to find more parking. We found 2 parking lots nearby. And when we had the building and this additional parking, then we were able to get them to execute on a lease while we were underway. But we started off very spec.
It's great. And then relationship, built, and you went on to do 13 deals with them?
Yes.
So I skipped over something that I want to go back to. You were also a prolific residential developer. So I think you told me you bought a loft in Soho along the way and kind of accidentally got into the residential development business.
So I lived in a rent stabilized 1 bedroom and was managing my expenses well. And I lived like that up until my first son was born. Wes is 27 now. And at that point, then I decided I wanted to have more room for a family. We couldn't all live in a 1 bedroom. So I bought a loft down in Soho. I had long been, design addict. I don't know why. It was just a hobby of mine. And before Pinterest, I had a photo album where I would literally cut out magazine, images, things that I like. And so I took this raw space loft and I hired a young architect and I showed him my photo album and told him what I wanted. And, we started designing this apartment together. When it came time to sell it, I sold it to Michael Dell's younger brother, Adam Dell. He's a great guy. Must have been all 25 at the time. And I made, I think, $2 million on that project. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is my evening job. So for the next 20 years, I had my day job, which was storage, and my evening was converting mostly townhouses. I did a couple other buildings, the condo project we're living in. I did 54 Bond, the Bowery Lane Theater building, but mostly townhouses from multifamily into single family. Very design driven, very bespoke, but I loved it. And it was a lucrative side hustle.
You were one of the first to really kind of recognize that trend. What about the townhouse business and kind of seeing that multifamily buildings could become townhouses if you convert them? Like, how did you initially see that?
So at that time, an apartment would sell for, let's say, $1,000 a square foot in luxury, and a townhouse would sell for $300 a square foot if it was cut up into units. And the law allowed you to take over, recover rent regulated units in a townhouse for your own use. And so I saw the arbitrage. I saw a townhouse fully renovated might sell for $10 million and unrenovated might sell for $2 million. And the renovation cost was 2 or 3 million. And so I saw a big arbitrage of working through that process, but also I really enjoyed it from a design perspective. So I started in and I ended up doing quite a few of those while there was an opportunity. And then over time, what I found is that renovation costs went up, purchase price went up, sale prices didn't follow so much. And so, as people enter a business and you sort of see margin compression, you have to know when it's time to leave the party. And I saw when it was time to leave the party. And so I stopped doing it.
With all businesses, you got to understand when your competitive advantage is over, when the alpha's already made, and kind of move on to the next potential opportunity. No one's been better at that than you.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I still do my own leasing. I saw with the Amazon business, I saw when Amazon was coming in, when demand was tremendous, when we had great margins. But I also saw when the calls were slowing down and when we weren't seeing as much demand, and knowing when to exit the business is important as knowing when to enter.
So at what point, because you've also done a fair amount of EV charging deals, did that start from the Amazon relationship?
So I was on the board at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. It's called the Director's Cabinet. And so I've always been really interested in nature and the environment, and was very involved with initiating what became the 100-year campus master plan, of sort of thinking of much longer terms about campus and their physical 70 acres of ocean front in La Jolla. And so I kind of came into an Amazon meeting with that mindset. And so I asked Amazon one question, which is, how do we keep you happy for 40 years instead of 10 years?
Right.
And they said, EV charging. We need you to power up these parking lots you're leasing to us for Rivian delivery vans, which at that point hadn't been delivered to Amazon. And so as soon as they said that, a kind of light went off. And I thought, okay, we're thinking about the energy transition. We're thinking about electric vehicles. What do electric vehicles need in a city where people don't have garages? They need public charging.
Yep.
And so that began kind of an adventure where we may be the most active in that space now. So we have Revel opening up a charging station at LaGuardia. We have the biggest one in the city we're doing at JFK. We've got another one at JFK. We have 3 at Hunts Point, which is where our food comes in the Bronx. So we're building out a network of electric vehicle charging stations to help power the energy transition.
It's definitely where the world is going, and that kind of combination of power and infrastructure and real estate and colliding, and you definitely took advantage of that. Now you have a huge project currently going on that's built that I know has been both a huge project in terms of scale, but also a passion project. Wildflower Studios, the first brand new studio built in New York City in how long?
It's the first vertical film studio in the world. And it's an immersive content creation campus that I co-founded with Robert De Niro.
So this deserves a little kind of background. So I would love you to tell the story about how you went from a industrial developer at the time to building a, how many hundreds of millions of dollars film studio with Robert De Niro. Just tell me the story.
So I'd say the story's got a couple parts. The first is Robert and I have been friends for 20 years, and I'm also friends with his oldest son, Raphael, who's a very successful real estate broker, and just there's wonderful people. Because I was doing my own leasing at Wildflower, I was listening to conversations where people were asking us if they could rent our warehouse space for film productions. And after 5 or 10 of those inbounds, I went to see Robert and Raphael to say, is this a business? What does this mean? Because I wanted to understand, these demand trends. And we were all, watching the rise of streaming content, and we all watch Netflix at night. And it turns out, Robert thought there was an exciting business opportunity. And, I'm not a film nut. I don't particularly care about it. I've got very lowbrow taste in TV and movies. I like action adventure and rom-coms. So Robert sent me around the country with Raphael to see what everybody was doing. And what I found was, much like the beginning of the storage business, like it was very non-institutionalized in the physical space. So whether you're producing a film or you're shipping a box out of Amazon, there's a logistics to it. There's a process to this, and that process can be optimized in the physical space. Like the luxury residential world, people were spending their days in these tired, ugly warehouses instead of beautiful environments. And the psychology of design, the psychology of how people feel in space wasn't considered there at all. And if you think about creative people, they're most deeply affected by their environment. And so, as I started to explore and read about it, this idea of kind of performance meets poetry came up, where we build a film studio which was highly efficient, but also elevated the process of filmmaking and hopefully for all the creative people that are involved with it. So we found a site off market. It was half of the Steinway Piano Factory site. So we bought a little over 5 acres in Astoria, Queens. We brought in architect Bjarke Engels, who's a well-known Danish architect. And then we had a year of interviews where we interviewed practitioners about what idealized space would look like for film production. And out of that, we created this Wildflower Studios, 760,000 foot, close to $1 billion immersive content creation campus. And if you were to go there today, we're the most occupied in the city. We have Severance filming, The Exorcist with Scarlett Johansson, other productions. And people are really happy there.
It's amazing. I mean, it's a real value add to the film industry in New York. And it's, when you drive by and see it, the architecture is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very ambitious project. It had never been done before. Would I have made more money? Would it have been easier to do another Amazon warehouse? Sure. But would we be giving back to New York City and the creative community and hopefully making a difference and keeping New York at the front end of relevance in the creative community? Those are really the goals.
So you do you have a lot of interests and passions outside of just real estate. And we talked about cars. We talked about, the Scripps Center. One of the things that I think is super interesting that you do now is at your home in California on your ranch, you raise Wagyu beef.
Yeah. So I raise Japanese Wagyu beef for local restaurants. I got into that. I wanted to find a beautiful piece of land worth saving. So I bought a 227 acre working cattle ranch in the middle of wine country. And then started raising Japanese Wagyu beef for local restaurants because nobody else was doing it. And we thought we could, again, have fun, raise Wagyu at a very high level, and have a little bit of a voice in the food community. So not everything's about making money. In fact, a lot of things aren't. It's about having impact, having fun, right? Being part of a community and, elevating the level of play.
When you think about your career, I think it's important, to always have some kind of competitive advantage. I like to call it a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. What would you say your 90-mile-an-hour fastball has been throughout your career that's allowed you to have success in all these different fields, and and the common thread that has kind of been there? Because when you do something as differently as building self-storage, to building luxury townhouses, to building a film studio, there has to be some kind of common thread and competitive advantage because you've been successful at all of it. What has that been?
I think it's a number of things. I am very, very, very focused on having a voice, making sure that I'm differentiated, that I'm early, and I'm building in areas that have great margins, so that it's incredibly profitable. If I see a business, I want a business that's got scale, because the law of large numbers is very relevant. You do these little deals and there's just not a lot of scratch for everyone. And I think that I'm curious by nature, so I'm seeing where the world is going and where unfulfilled demand is, and then trying to seize it. So, I mean, those are some of the things. I also believe in executing with a great team. So we have wonderful people at Wildflower. All of our project managers are engineers by training, so they're all technical. And when I'm entering a new business, I'm always entering it with somebody that's got a tremendous amount of experience. So whether it's, Steve McKnight in the storage business, and he had a dozen years, when he and I started in, Robert De Niro's probably, 50 years in the business. So I'm always going in with experts. So I come in with, a lot of humility. It's fine not to know, but you got to make sure that you have somebody who does.
Yeah. And has there been projects or business lines that you thought were interesting, that you started and you saw quickly that despite what you thought, that didn't work and you cut your loss? How have you kind of looked at that? Because I'm sure not every single thing that you've tried or had an idea about was as successful as kind of the things you talked about. Like how did you deal with kind of just balancing that risk reward and certain things that might not have worked?
Well, it's incredibly important to be risk managed. So I'm an OPM developer, other people's money developer. So I invest a very nominal amount of money, a fraction of guaranteed fees. I want to be risk off. I don't cross my projects. I don't cross my promotes. I don't sign a bunch of guarantees. So there are some completion guarantees, but typically not repayment guarantees. So the first thing is I'm very risk off. The second is, look, nobody's perfect. Warren Buffett's deals haven't all worked out. All my deals haven't worked out. But because I'm risk managed, none of those are going to kind of capsize me.
Yep.
Because anybody who tells you that they have a perfect track record isn't telling you the truth. No. It's just not going to happen.
No. Managing your downside, I think allowing for upside and managing your downside might be the most important advice any real estate investor period can kind of give you. What advice would you give? I mean, it's a really interesting time in the world right now. Some would say it's scary for kids coming out of college, young professionals, with AI and people worried about jobs and their jobs being taken away. What advice would you give both, young people in college or young professionals that are just starting their career, to kind of best prepare them, from what you've learned?
Well, I think, first of all, the real estate business is very different than when I joined it. The major food groups, like multifamily, like industrial, like office, retail, have all been institutionalized. So all of the opportunity is in alternatives, right? And the good news is, in these new businesses, nobody's an expert. So a young person can be an expert very, very quickly. That's positive. Climate change is real, right? And so if you look at companies like Icon that are 3D printing homes in 4 days, there's opportunities to build millions and millions of homes. So there's great opportunities in new sectors. And what I would encourage, everybody to do is not only be a lifelong learner, but to think about what's next instead of what's historical. And then you have the opportunity as a young person to get out there, and people will talk to you if you can add value to them. And so going and offering to buy somebody a cup of coffee to sit down with them and talk to them about where they think the world's going, what's interesting to them, what's scary to them, where the risks are, and developing mentoring relationships, incredibly important. I had a mentor for nearly 30 years, and I would speak to him probably twice a week for 30 years. He actually spoke at my wedding. He made all the difference in my career. And so I think you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
But having mentors and friends and industry experts who want to help you, bring you up, and you bring them up too, and this sort of reciprocal relationship is completely vital.
Yeah, and you can't be afraid to reach out. I think, one of the things that I've seen a parallel in your career is you were constantly not only curious and learning, but you were then using that curiosity and what you learned and reaching out to people and asking them and sitting down and meet whether it was the internship you got at Trammell Crow, or whether it was sitting down with just listing the self-storage buildings in their companies in New York and calling Steve and persuading him to come work with you and just asking questions. So it's that combination of curiosity and learning, and then also doing something with that and not being afraid to reach out and not being afraid to look silly and just, hey, can I come talk to you? And kind of constantly add value. So Adam, this has been incredible. You are a true real estate entrepreneur, and it's just been an honor having you here today.
Good. Thank you for having me.